It was a bitterly cold night in early December, and the snowstorm had turned the world outside into a blur of white. The wind howled through the bare trees, bending their skeletal branches in odd, unsettling shapes, and the snowflakes seemed to fall in endless waves, blanketing everything in sight. The night was thick with silence, save for the occasional creak of the wind or the muffled roar of passing cars. Amid this storm, a small, fragile figure lay abandoned on the side of the road, shivering and lost. It was a puppy, barely more than a few months old, its fur matted with dirt and snow. Its tiny body was curled up in an attempt to keep warm, but the relentless snowstorm made it impossible for the little creature to find any comfort. The puppy's eyes, wide with fear and confusion, darted back and forth as it tried to make sense of its harsh surroundings. Its breathing was shallow and labored, and its small frame trembled uncontrollably. There was no warmth here, no shelter, only the cold, biting wind and the swirling snow. No one could have predicted how it had come to be here, alone, abandoned, with no one to care for it. There were no answers to the questions that might have lingered in the air. But one thing was certain: the puppy's chances of survival were slim, and every minute that passed without help brought it closer to the cruel, inevitable fate that awaited it. However, fate had other plans that night. Sophie Mitchell was a kind-hearted woman, someone who believed in the goodness of the world, even when it seemed in short supply. She had grown up in a small town nestled between rolling hills, and she had always believed that everyone could make a difference, no matter how small their actions might seem. Sophie had spent the evening inside, enjoying the warmth of her little cottage, sipping hot cocoa by the fire. She had a peaceful life, filled with simple joys, and that night seemed no different from any other. Until, as she was driving home from a late-night errand, she noticed something strange. The snowstorm had obscured much of her view, but there in the distance she saw a small dark shape lying on the side of the road. At first she thought it was just debris blown from the trees or some other inconsequential object, but as she drew closer she realized that it was a living creature. The shape was moving, slowly, painfully, its tiny form barely visible against the blanket of snow. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She pulled over to the side of the road without a second thought, her headlights illuminating the small, trembling puppy. It was clear that the little one had been abandoned, left there to fend for itself in the cold, harsh storm. Without hesitation, Sophie jumped out of her car and rushed over to the puppy. The poor thing was so weak that it barely acknowledged her presence, its eyes clouded with fear. Sophie gently scooped the tiny animal into her arms, cradling it against her chest, feeling its cold body shiver against her warmth. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered, her voice full of compassion. "Don't worry, I've got you now. You're safe." She carefully placed the puppy in the passenger seat of her car, wrapping it in her coat to shield it from the cold. Sophie turned the car around and began driving, her mind racing as she thought of what she could do for the little creature. Her first instinct was to take the puppy to the nearest veterinarian, but the snowstorm was so fierce that it would take too long to get to the clinic. So Sophie did what she knew best: she drove back to her cottage. It was a small, cozy home, the kind that always felt warm and inviting. It wasn't the most practical place for an emergency, but it was home, and she knew that she could at least provide the puppy with some shelter from the storm. Once inside, Sophie set the puppy down on a soft towel by the fire. She gently wiped away the snow and dirt from its fur, brushing it softly to make the little one more comfortable. Its coat, once a golden brown, was now covered in a thick layer of grime. But underneath, Sophie could see the puppy's ribs, clearly visible beneath the thin fur. It had been hungry for days, perhaps weeks. Her heart ached as she realized just how much the little one had suffered. The puppy's eyes were half-lidded, barely able to keep them open. Its breath was shallow, its body weak. Sophie feared it might not survive the night, and the thought crushed her. She had seen enough to know that this puppy had been abandoned by someone, a cruel, heartless person who had thrown it out like trash, leaving it to die alone in the snow. Sophie didn't know how anyone could do such a thing, but she didn't have time to dwell on that now. She had to focus on the puppy and do everything she could to save it. Sophie worked quickly. She boiled some water to make a warm broth, hoping to give the puppy something to drink. She mixed in a little bit of food, hoping the warmth would revive the pup's appetite. But the puppy barely responded, its body too weak to even take a sip. Sophie knew that time was running out. She stroked the puppy's soft fur, speaking to it in gentle tones, trying to reassure it as much as she could. "You're not alone anymore," Sophie whispered. "I'll take care of you. You'll be okay." But as the hours passed, Sophie could feel the puppy growing weaker in her arms. Its breathing became more labored, its body even colder. She fought against the growing sense of helplessness that threatened to overwhelm her. She had done everything she could, but there was no denying the truth. The puppy was slipping away. Sophie held the puppy close, pressing it gently against her chest, and she cried. She cried for the little one who had known nothing but suffering, for the cruel person who had abandoned it in the snowstorm, and for the harshness of the world that allowed such things to happen. Her tears soaked into the puppy's fur as she whispered one last promise. "I'm so sorry, little one. I tried. I tried." The storm raged on outside, but inside the cottage it was quiet. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the walls, as Sophie cradled the puppy in her arms. Slowly its breath slowed and finally it stilled. The little puppy was gone. The days that followed were some of the hardest of Sophie's life. The grief of losing the little puppy weighed heavily on her heart. She had done everything she could, but in the end, it hadn't been enough. She couldn't stop thinking about the puppy, the way it had looked at her with those big, frightened eyes, the way it had trusted her in its final moments. It had deserved a better life, a life filled with love and warmth, but instead, it had been cast aside, left to die alone. But Sophie knew she couldn't let that be the end of the story. She couldn't let that little puppy's life be in vain. In the days after the storm, Sophie made a decision. She would give the puppy a proper farewell, one that would honor its short, painful life. She took the little body to the backyard of her cottage, to a small spot beneath the old oak tree that had always been her favorite place in the world. There she dug a small grave, and when it was ready she gently placed the puppy's tiny body inside, covering it with earth. As she stood over the grave, Sophie vowed that she would not let this tragedy go unnoticed. She would do everything in her power to help other animals who were abandoned or neglected, to give them the care and love they deserved. She planted a small sapling by the grave, a tree that would grow in memory of the little puppy who had touched her heart in ways she could never fully explain. "I promise," Sophie whispered to the tree. "I'll do everything I can to help. No animal should suffer like this." From that day forward, Sophie became an advocate for animals in need. She volunteered at shelters, raised awareness about animal cruelty, and dedicated her life to making the world a better place for every creature. She never forgot the little puppy, and every time she saw a new animal in need, she remembered the promise she had made under the oak tree. As the years passed, the sapling grew tall and strong, a living tribute to the puppy that had stolen Sophie's heart and changed her life forever. Someone who loves their motivated animal friend, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories. Have you ever had a pet who seemed to know just what you needed even when you couldn't say it, or maybe a time when your pet did something that seemed almost miraculous? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Who knows, maybe I'll feature your story in a future video. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay tuned for more incredible tales that just might change the way you see the world. See you in the next one.